I'm going to close by talking about other forms of Ghoki, not in detail necessarily, but as counterpoints to the dash jump method, as a way of illustrating why I think dash jumping is really the only choice for people who are trying to do this at even a high intermediate level. And I'm going to run through this, but it takes a little work because there's so many friggin' ways to do Ghoki, and I'm going to have to weed through those a little bit and narrow it down. So I'll do 3 options, but I'm not saying that you can't wing it and that you have to do the same thing every time. You know, there are tons of ways to do Ghoki. You can improvise, you can get creative. It's totally fine, right? You don't need to do the same thing every time. I've personally been known to, you know, dash jump in and do like this, right? Which is not necessarily real in that M is plus 21 there, so, you know, having a gap is like very easy to have happen. But at the same time, right, you can mess with people. The 3 that I would choose, though, as the ones that I see most commonly referred to are Whiff JL, Triple Negative Edge Normal Jump, and IEDJH. And what do those look like? So Whiff JL is where you hold S, and then you whiff JL, and then you tap H during JL, so you get 3 ghosts. Nice little string there. The Triple Negative Edge one is exactly what it sounds like. You just hold these buttons and you release them like that. I've never done this before, so I don't know the exact muscle memory to do it, but it's exactly what it sounds like. You're just normal jumping. It's a safer version of Whiff JL. The IDJH is where you release S, and then you actually use JH block stun to continue, and then you release L and M during Super Dash, and you get an SD 50-50 like that. So these are the 3 that I see most commonly used. And they share one particular downside that is actually relevant in gameplay, and it has come up many times for me, I'm sure, although I've never used any of these methods, so I don't like consciously register it every time. But the problem is distance. The problem is just distance. Now you can say that Gotenks has amazing corner carry, and he's very likely to hit the corner, but he's just not going to hit it every time. Whether you get a long, far from corner 2H into assist DR, or some kind of tag into DR mid-screen, or something like this, right? You're going to have situations, random air-to-air conversions into grounded 2 and 4M, as I mentioned in the spacing video. You're going to have situations where you will be like this far away from them. And S-Ghost will beat frame 4s here. If you cannot mix them from here, you are not exploiting the super properly. That is simply true. And if we're normal jumping, we have no mix, right? We can air dash, but that's not mix, right? We just have nothing. If we IDJH, we have nothing, right? We need this block stun to keep the mix going, and distance is really the thing here. You are constrained, if not to actual 7JH Ghoki, then to 8 or 9JH Ghoki that is very similar in distance to 7JH. Of course, you have a little bit of latitude, maybe, but it is a really big downside, actually, that will come up more often than maybe you expect. I promise. Other downsides are more specific to the individual setups, and I don't need to spend too much time on them, especially with JL, because I think the downside is obvious, right? If I do this setup, I'm whiffing JL. And after the Ghoki nerf, this actually became a little safer, because if your opponent does immediate tech into, for example, a reversal super with a freeze, they'll eat your JL input, and you won't be swinging. It's much harder to get punished against immediate tech now than it used to be, but if they delay tech, all bets are off, and you're totally screwed. So with JL, it has that problem of just leaving you swinging with a normal. This is a fine method, though, as a stopgap. I will leave a link in the description to Livingston's video on this method, which he intends to be just a sort of beginner starter Ghoki, and it is totally fine up to the intermediate level. You can just do this as you learn all of the other nuances of this character. I know he's really complicated and hard to wrap your head around, so you can absolutely do this. The other IDJH, I will say just quickly, has one major flaw, which is that you can guard cancel Super Dash. It's not hard to do. There's a big thing on the screen that says chase, and also Super Dash has a unique animation, so it's just not hard to do. You can't even counter vanish it, and if you could, you just leave them mid-screen. So this is not a good setup. This is actually the worst setup. You might think that whiffing JL is the worst, but in my opinion, IDJH is actually the worst version of Ghoki that has been popularized at any point. I do not see people doing it anymore, and I think it's because they became skittish about guard cancel, and that's understandable. But at the same time, just know that it's probably not what you want to be doing, certainly not at a higher level. The final version is more complicated. That's the normal jump triple negative edge thing. Now this, I mean, the distance, well, I released S a little late there, that's my bad. The distance thing is definitely an issue, but there are other maybe less obvious downsides, and one of them is that because you're normal jumping, you're actually susceptible to some frame 1 DPs, at least in the sense that you have to block them. And I'll just hold normal jump so I'm getting it as soon as possible. I blocked Gohan here, right? And if he's level 7, that means I effectively can't really do Ghoki against him because he can cancel this into stuff and he's safe, right? Or Cooler's level 3, I will show, well, I don't really need to show it, but you can't effectively punish it, first of all, because he would be landing in the ghosts, so you lose out on a lot of damage and corner carry. But also, it seems to me in testing, and you can try this, that if you normal jump against Cooler's level 3 after triggering it, it is much harder to air dash after he side switches, and I don't know why that would be. It might be because when you have dash momentum, and you're flying through the air or whatever, he kind of grabs you slightly later, like or something like this, but I don't know why that's true, but that's how it felt to me. But regardless, I'll show you that, as I said in the other video, there are no frame 1s that matter against Ghoki. I can just do this, and he's gonna run into ghosts, right? This is just the dash jump method at its finest. Now, if you do 6SD9, you do want to focus on buffering this pretty well. But as you can see there, if you do it like really fast, I mean, there's basically no startup. And you also want to buffer this super well, because Adult Gohan is really fast with his DP. But you can get over it, and you just can't do anything about this if you're normal jumping. And the final thing is, of course, that if I'm here, I'm not really like as tricky with my trajectory and momentum as I am if I'm like doing this, right? And so the spark evasions are a little less nuanced, I would say. These are, you know, a few specific reasons to do dash jump over the normal jump method. But again, the real draw for this is that you just always get there with your low, like you just do. And the only downside to this setup at all, compared to the others, is that you have to fast fall, right? Now, people have been doing super jump fast fall IDJL off of like Kid Buu A for years at this point. So, you know, it's a thing. It's a thing you can do. But it is slightly tricky to actually get that strong timing on the mix for the high option. Now, what I would recommend is if you're falling and you think you might be air dashing late, or just as a general rule, what you do is you just 2L, right? Well, I didn't air dash there, but you always 2L, right? You 6-6 2L. And that means that if you whiff your air dash, if you do it too late, you will still get mixed. You won't be standing there like an idiot doing 5L. So you will kind of have mixed yourself, and maybe your opponent is going to favor blocking low because the high is harder, but at the same time, just practice it and you will be fine. Other than that, I don't really have any particular closing thoughts. As I said, if you do want a stopgap while you wrap your head around this or learn the character, I will link Livison's video on the WIFJL Ghoki below, but I really appreciate it. And just as a final note, I take no credit for this method, by the way. I saw this the first day I picked up Gotenks when 1.25 came out and he got rejumps. Shikoto had a tweet, you know, the kind of godfather of Gotenks tech. We all stand on his shoulders, really. He had a tweet that had this method. It was the first thing I saw, and I was like, oh, well, that looks easy because I could moon jump pretty well. And, you know, I just did it, and I've never done anything else actually personally. It is not my method. I recommend it to a lot of people, but I take no credit in the development of this technique or anything like that. Unfortunately, you know, when we started, you didn't have to actually fast fall, right? It was just a normal dash jump, and this makes it a little more inexplicable to me that nobody picked this up in like the 2020-2021 range when Gotenks was actually seeing play, and there was a lot of interest and won a couple of things and all of that stuff. I don't know why people. It's actually not harder than any of the other versions. It's just better than they are, and if you take out the fast fall, it's possibly the easiest version. So I don't understand why people weren't doing it then, because fast fall wasn't added till later, but it doesn't matter. I'm gonna shut up. I just wanted to include my rant and also my respects to Shikoto for giving us this method. It was really ingenious, and I appreciate y'all listening. I hope it was somewhat instructive, but stop by the Discord and ask if you have any questions.